I'm going to walk you through some of the issues that we encountered dealing with taking GIS data and putting it online so that local level users can access it. And to give you just a background on planning, urban planning, this quote comes from, and I apologize for my lack of French, but Henri Fayol is a French engineer who pioneered several concepts dealing with business management. And dealing with engineering or planning, you realize that you're essentially laying a course for the future. But what is the biggest problem with setting a course for the future? You need to know where you are now. You need to have a good, strong understanding of the situations that you face currently, and in a lot of cases, the historic situations that you've had to deal with. To give you some perspective and background on New Jersey, how many of you have been to the beautiful Garden State? How many of you have just driven through on the New Jersey Turnpike? You can stop sometimes. We don't bite. To give you just some background, New Jersey's 565 municipalities. We are a home rule state. We have 21 counties that are effectively, they're not as non-operating as Massachusetts, but there are very few responsibilities that county government have. All of the local planning issues, with the exceptions of the Pinelands region, which was designated in 1979, and the Highlands region, which was designated in 2004, pretty much local level issues are left up to these tiny municipalities. We have 322 of them that are under 10,000 in size, in population size. We have 600 school districts. We have a thing called non-operating school districts where we pay people to essentially sign the agreement to send kids to a different school district. Having said that, we have in 1986 was the final set of New Jersey Superior or Supreme Court cases dealing with affordable housing. If you've heard of the Mount Laurel Doctrine or the Council of Affordable Housing, it is part of our. The court interpreted our Constitution to say that every one of those municipalities has an affordable housing obligation. If you can consider just how many lawsuits were then filed about what that obligation is. Having said that, a lot of local governments are broke. It's really hard in terms of getting funding. I live in a townhouse in Glassboro, and I pay $5,000 a year in taxes. It probably doesn't help that there's this big public institution in the middle of town that doesn't pay taxes, but it also pays my salary, so I can't complain too much. You know, the towns are lacking resources. If they have GIS staff, it's typically the larger municipalities. We have 7 or 8 suburban municipalities that still use the Demonym Township, but there are probably 100 to 120,000 people in size. They're big. Cherry Hill Township, which is in southern New Jersey, is about 70,000 people. It's about 7 miles away from Camden, also about 70,000 people. You've probably heard of Camden. Last year, it broke an all-time record in homicides. There was an end-of-year vigil that was held for those that were murdered, and they had to extend it at the end of the year because even then, there were still issues in the city. So even the cities that do have staff, they do have some resources. In a lot of cases, those resources are not getting really allocated towards GIS and planning. So how can we make the data that's out there accessible? Now, accessibility really comes down to, is it accessible or can it be easily accessed by the public through either physical or electronic means? The Sunlight Foundation recommends specifically providing electronic access whenever possible, removing forms of browser plugins or other specific tools that are needed to access that information, and then also making it machine readable as well as human readable. We've done a lot of work towards making data available, but to the extent that we've made it accessible remains to be seen. Accessibility is not putting a bunch of PDFs online. Accessibility is not making a zip file available for download. Accessibility is also not dumping all of your GIS layers into a web viewer. You tend to get information overload. Put yourself out of the mindset of a GIS person, put yourself in the mindset of someone who doesn't know what GIS is. So, in New Jersey, if you're not familiar with the copious amounts of data that's available through New Jersey, there is a ton of information that is out there. That also makes this much more problematic because everyone can have access to all of this data. There is the Open Public Records Act, which is also just referred to by acronym as OPRA, which usually when I go and talk outside of New Jersey and I say, you could just file an OPRA request, I get a look like, what are you talking about? Most of the data is available, and I think I'm on secret blacklists for complaining about the data that isn't. OPRA is pretty far-reaching with respect to how much information could be given out. And when I used to work in state government, our policy was as long as it wasn't deliberative, which is outlined in the law as excluded, we give it away. So what kind of information is out there? Well, DEP, our Department of Environmental Protection, has devoted at least a staff of 8 to answering OPRA requests. But back in 2001, we didn't have strong web technologies. They started to put up this platform called IMAP DEP, or IMAP NJ. The IMAP platform was based on ArcIMS back in the day. And it was well received by the community, but I question how many people got to use it because it was slow, it was clunky. We're talking, this is before tile-based map applications, caching, any of that kind of stuff was really discussed. It was really just the focus on let's get the data out there because we can do it now. It wasn't so much, is it actually going to be useful for the public? So a few years later, they produced NJGeoWeb, which is essentially the same thing, it's just upgraded technology. It's still, if you take a look at the scale bar over there, it is everything in the kitchen sink that DEP provides. DEP provides somewhere between 100 and 150 different data sets about all sorts of issues in the state. And DEP is not just environmental issues, they also have a lot of other data sets that they've provided. They were historically our GIS provider. They're, just for Esri references, they're Esri customer number 53. So they have a long history, but again, we've gotten to the point where it's accessible because we'll give you everything. It's not about getting everything, it's about getting the answers that you need. And the average person that doesn't know what GIS is, they think it's Google image search. They think it's a different acronym entirely. They don't have a clue that this is maps. What ends up happening is you subject them to the fire hose. And if all they're doing is just getting blasted in the face with information, you're missing that mark. You have the opportunity to reach out as an expert and really inform the public instead of overwhelm them. So how do we get information out to these people? First off, they don't want to use GIS. Some will perk up at the word GIS, some will perk up at the word maps, but really what they want is they want answers to their questions. They don't want to look at a map necessarily. They want an answer to their question. So what we're trying to do at Rowan University is we're taking different methods of taking all of that really rich GIS data that's out there for the state and make it manageable to the public. We're taking an ideology, we're calling this a thematic approach. So what a thematic approach does, and we're packaging it up as our New Jersey map project, the Municipal Asset Profiler, we're taking individual themes of data. So we're taking core concepts and related data sets and we're packaging them together in such a way that it makes sense to an end user. Yeah, there's still maps involved, but they come along with charts and narratives and other things to help kind of focus you in on a specific question or problem. So let me take a quick moment, if I can get this to, I'll bring it up at the end actually because I have a couple different things. I'm afraid if I change, I'm not going to get the screen back. To give you just a quick view, and I'll return to this later, this is our animated maps of land use change. It's not animating on the slide, but we have 4 different years of complete land use land cover data for the state of New Jersey with a minimum mapping unit of 1 acre. From 86, 1995, 2002, 2007, we provide them in animated form so that you could see for any given municipality how the landscape has changed over time. We also present that in chart form so that you could see, in this instance, this is Washington Township. Glassboro is here, the university's right about there. Washington Township was a suburban farming community up until about the 1970s. And then pretty much all they did was plant residential housing developments. I mean, the road pattern from 1880 hasn't changed. They just widened the roads. So there's been a massive increase in this case urban lands at the expense of farmland. And another theme that we put together is, well, how is that farmland actually broken down? So this is our agricultural preservation toolkit. Another theme that you can access by going to the website. What we're looking at here then is agricultural land broken out by, if it's prime farmland, which is agricultural land use on top of prime farm soils, or it's just ag land in utilization, but it's not necessarily on the right soils. We also have charts of the amount of land that's currently in agricultural production, the amount of land that has been lost from agricultural production, and then the amount of land that's been preserved down here in blue. And those colors correspond to the areas that are depicted on the map. The core concept behind this is GIS data is complex. What we need to do is keep things simple. It's got to be readily digestible by individuals coming to this. And I want to take you back in time for just a moment, because about 15 years ago, if you're like me, you probably ended up on a website like this. Does anyone remember this? So, this is actually the framework that's now called Microsoft Research Maps, but it was called TerraServer. So if you remember TerraServer back in the day, I wasted hours of time looking at TerraServer, looking at these grainy black and white images of everywhere it seemed imaginable. TerraServer was really a pioneer in the sense that they really thought about tiling imagery, having some things cached. But at the time, take a look at this diagram here. The TerraServer was 9 cabinets. 8 of those cabinets were 324 9-gigabyte hard drives. In a white paper that Microsoft released, they crowed over the fact that they were able to get together 3 terabytes of data, almost 3 terabytes of data they were able to assemble and then serve up online. I checked Newegg today, a 4 terabyte hard drive is $389. And it doesn't require me to partner with 10 other very large tech companies in order to acquire this. I mean, times have considerably changed, and they're going to continue to change. Do you know what your next round of users are going to be? Teenagers on mobile phones, and if your application doesn't work right now, they're going to do something else. On the whole, technology is going to make people more impatient. They're not going to be like we were, listening to a 56K modem, crackling in the background so we could get TerraServer, black and white imagery. It's just not going to happen anymore. And the next generation is going to be even more impatient. This is my son. That was my niece. My son's looking at Google Earth. My older son, who's 3, steals the iPad all the time and has no problem using it. So your applications really need to be responsive and engaging. If you're not getting people to use it and really interact with it, you're almost designing more, not for the technology, but more for emotion. You want people to actually get involved with it. You may think, how is GIS even emotional? But you deal with things like you deal with parks, you deal with city services, people get emotional. If you've dealt with members of the public, emotion is the first thing you encounter. People are typically angry. Instead of giving them a platform where they get frustrated, give them a platform where they can get engaged. So one of the facets of our NJ MAP program, because our last iteration of land use data was from 2007. 2007 was when the economy kind of went in the toilet, for lack of a better term. And we're trying to figure out how much development has actually occurred in the state of New Jersey since 2007. Because we're waiting for that next iteration of land use data. We did just receive 2012 aerial photography for the whole state. It was flown within a 3-week period in March. So we have the new aerial photography, but it's going to take a while for the land use data to be derived from that. So what we're putting together is a platform where you can go online, and I ask that all of you give this a shot. Go online, you can make an account for free. All the data is going to be made free and available at the end. But you can go onto this webpage and you can start to look at an aerial photograph. And I've masked out the areas that were considered urban in 2007. So essentially, and this is as easy as you can get, if you see a house, click on it. Just give me an indication of how big of a house it is. We have ways of doing that. Give it a try. Let us know if you encounter any bugs. we're still working on a few things. We're aiming to have an October 8th release date. So we're going to try and incorporate things like game theory. You could be the champion or the mayor of Salem County because you put the most points on the map that have been QA'd as valid. We also want to put up statistics, real-time statistics about the project and stats by user, and also provide snapshots to the counties and municipalities so they have a better understanding. Because as much as there's other data out there, we're looking at permit data, we're looking at ACS data, there's still not necessarily a direct correlation where you could say they're clustered in this area right next to critical infrastructure or wetlands or whatnot without having it in geographic form. So again, our time frame, October 8th, we're going to have a kickoff event. I'm going to try and, what's great about being a professor and having crowdsourcing kind of things, extra credit. You instantly get some people that will at least give it a shot. Early November and mid-December, we're hoping to get some preliminary results out of it and then have a published white paper. I'm also not really a strong academic. I would much rather see policy things than articles in a journal. We're hoping that we can give various NGOs in our state numbers on how much New Jersey has urbanized over the last 5 years. So with that, I'm going to jump over, hopefully, to the Municipal Asset Profiler. Which direction am I going? Oh, so let's see if this works. All right, so remember what I said about engaging and responding. The first thing you get is nice pictures. You also get a form field to start typing things in. So it's all cached. So this should be very quick. I should be able to start typing in anything, and all 566 municipalities should pop up quickly. Just simple JSON, put it on the page so that way it loads immediately. I don't have to start querying to a server for anything. It's just static data, but it appears very responsive, very, very quick. I'm going to jump over. When you type in Glassboro, this isn't the page I wanted. Let's do it here then. Type in Glassboro, hit enter. That's another thing. Having the fact that you could type something and hit enter and not have to move your hand back to the mouse and click the button makes a big difference for people that are just casual web users. They come to expect that. So here we have all 565 municipalities have their own profile page. Here are the available themes that we've made. We're working on more. This is an iterative process. I welcome any and all feedback you have, any ideas for a theme or how to improve the themes that exist. We went and grabbed, how do you explain, give something at least rational for 565 different municipalities? Wikipedia is Creative Commons licensed, so we wrote some Python to go. Python and Beautiful Soup is a module for screen scraping and parsing HTML documents. Pulled all of that out, put it on each page. One of the things that I will hopefully talk about at the dev meetup tonight, how I got a nice little list of nearby municipalities. Wrote that using PostGIS. It took me about 15 minutes. How would you come up with a good list of all the municipalities that touch each other? Can be done. There's a bunch of different ways to do it. We used a SQL self-join and some relational logic to spit out essentially a series of JSON files to populate that kind of list. Let's take a look at land use change. Hopefully this will load quickly. So here you can see it animated. If I can... So it's loading very quickly for the most part, I hope. The few things that will take a while to load is the municipal mass. That's drawn dynamically by our servers. But everything else, the aerial photography that's provided, is provided by the state of New Jersey, who caches it. They use it, the Lizard Tech, I think, image server for the WMS services of the aerial photography. You can also switch between the different aerial time frames here under the controls. If you wanted to say, look at, you know, we could look at... We could look at the 1930s imagery that's available for the state if we wanted even more historical context. All of the, as you put them, operational layers that we've put together, like the land use, species habitat information, those farmland layers, they're all cached. We run tile cache, we push them into an S3 bucket, and then we have perhaps probably one of the biggest content distribution networks on the planet, Amazon Web Services, push all the tiles out to our users. So a lot of this is done in advance, and we just cache it to disk. Disks, we know now, are not that expensive. I mean, to put all of the information into the predecessor to this, my Amazon bill at the end of the month was like, it was in cents, not dollars, for putting a lot of information in there. Remember, their scale of a lot is terabytes. Map tiles for the state of New Jersey is like still in gigabytes. So you can get by with pushing a lot in there and not really incur a huge debt in doing so. Finally, I'm going to hop back, just show you our Ag Toolkit. So this is another one that, of course, it'll take a little bit to load, but when it does, you'll see prime farmland, and we did some spatial functions to just compare the Surgo soils, which have the prime soil classification for New Jersey, and the ag farmland together, because we wanted to be able to show municipalities that just because you're preserving agricultural land doesn't mean, I mean, how does ag land get preserved? It's the lot that's next to the suburban housing development that's going in. Is it necessarily good soil, or is it just someone with a farm field? If it's on good soil, those are the ones you should perhaps highlight. You know, pay more for a good farm. You're going to own it forever. So we try and make these tools work in such a way that it makes sense to the public. The other concept that we put forth is we make providing us feedback very easy. We use Get Satisfaction. We publish our email address. We're at a big university in South Jersey. It's not that hard to find us. We're very receptive to comments and change because ultimately we want it to work for the public. So it really is an iterative process. You're looking at version 1, and it's going to continue on in different versions throughout, you know, as long as we can keep this thing running. So with that, I don't know if it's going to come back. I just have one final slide to say. This here's my contact information. If you have any questions of me, if you want some more detail on how this was put together, by all means, I'm going to be around tomorrow and maybe Thursday morning. I'd love to talk to you. Thank you.